What's up, everybody? We are once again going to be taking a look at NOVO Nordisk. We last looked at this stock, ticker symbol NVO, a few months ago, I think about 3 months ago, because it was right after they released their Q2 earnings. At the time, the stock was pretty much exactly the same price it is today. I think it was about $51 a share in that last video, so it was somewhere around here. The stock went up all the way to maybe low 60s, and well, now it's back down under $50 a share. We also have another quarter of data to look at, so we're going to check that out. We're going to see, is there value here in NOVO Nordisk today? I'm going to give you my opinion, and I'll tell you what I'm doing with my money. If you get value out of the video, subscribe to the channel. As always, nothing here is advice to buy or sell this stock. I'm just giving you my opinion. Now, let's get into it. And to start, NOVO Nordisk is a very popular stock among value investors. And when you just take a quick look, it's easy to see why. First of all, revenue growth has simply exploded. This has pretty much all been due to GLP-1s. NOVO Nordisk, they used to be, their main business was manufacturing and producing insulin. But that was then, this is now, this huge explosion of revenue. This is Ozempic and Wegovy. Those are basically the same drug. It's both semaglutide, it's a GLP-1. The only difference is one is prescribed for diabetes, the other is simply for weight loss, and this is now the bulk of their business. If we just look at their sales, roughly half of their sales, and they're reporting here in Danish krone, but roughly half of their sales are from GLP-1 diabetes, and about a quarter is from obesity care. Again, basically the same drug. It's just, what is that drug prescribed for? So you have somewhere around 75-ish% of their revenue coming from essentially one drug. And as far as geography, most of that is from the US. Now, this is something we talked about last quarter. By volume, there are more prescriptions of their drugs internationally than in the US, but the US has higher revenue than all of international combined. And that's simply because these drugs cost a ton more in the US. Ozempic and Wegovy, you're probably paying $1,000 to $1,200 a month for these drugs in the US. Now, whether you're paying that or your insurance company or the government is subsidizing it, one way or another, NOVO Nordisk is getting their money. On the other hand, internationally, these drugs are typically costing anywhere from maybe $150 to $350-ish dollars. So typically we're talking, 3 to 4 times more maybe in the US for these drugs than in other even developed nations, Japan, France, UK. That's great and all for Novo, and we see the effect on their top line, but you have to ask yourself, do we think that this is going to continue going forward? Drugs typically are more expensive in the US than overseas for a number of reasons that we're not going to get into in this video, but there's a couple reasons to think that could change going forward. First, Trump wants to bring the price of these drugs in the US more in line with the price overseas, so we're going to see reductions in the cost of these drugs to Medicare and Medicaid. It looks like the price is going to be under $300 a month for the drug for these programs, so that is a massive reduction. On top of that, the cash price for these drugs is being cut in the US to, I think, about $500 a month. So yes, while this could increase volume, while this could increase the accessibility of these drugs to certain populations, likely this is simply going to reduce profits. So that's definitely a concern that we should consider. But another concern, probably a larger concern, is simply, how does NOVO Nordisk stack up against competition? And the fact of the matter is, NOVO Nordisk, which is in the blue here, has been losing market share against Eli Lilly, against Mounjaro. Year over year, Ozempic revenue up slightly, but we see that Mounjaro revenue has more than doubled. Ozempic is no longer the market leader, and frankly, it seems like their drug, semaglutide, is just less effective than tirzepatide, which is the drug that Eli Lilly is using. On the weight loss side, we also see that Wegovy is losing ground against Zepbound. Wegovy has been stagnating, and while yes, we see that this year, the last 4 quarters, the light blue here, it's up massively from the previous year, but quarter over quarter, there isn't much growth here, and actually Ozempic has been trending down. On top of this, everyone really talks about 2 players in this space. We talk about Eli Lilly and we talk about NOVO Nordisk, but there's going to be more competition in the future. Everyone sees how profitable these drugs have been. Competition is going to go up. There's a company, Metsera, that was just acquired by Pfizer. In fact, there was a bit of a bidding war between Pfizer and NOVO Nordisk, but Pfizer ended up buying Metsera, which doesn't even have a drug on the market right now. They have several drugs that are in pipeline. They have injectable and oral GLP-1s that they are testing out, but they don't even have a commercially available drug. They aren't even in phase 3 trials for a drug right now. And this company sold for, I think, $10 billion. You have other big pharma companies like Amgen that are trying to develop a competitor to all these GLP-1s as well. So bottom line, in the future, do I think that the pricing of these drugs will be as high as we have seen over the past few years? I'm not sure. I'm not confident that it will be. We see international market share slipping as well. And here we see US GLP-1 diabetes total prescriptions, okay? And in the blue at the top, this is Novo Nordisk GLP-1s. And yeah, it's up a bit year over year, but the growth here isn't crazy. What's this gray line? What's this line that has just been going up and up and up? Well, this down here, tirzepatide. Tirzepatide is the name of the drug that Eli Lilly is using in Mounjaro and Zepbound. So while Novo Nordisk was first to market here, everyone knows the name Ozempic simply because it came out first and it was huge. Tirzepatide, Eli Lilly's drug, it's a smaller molecule. It has certain advantages. It seems to specifically perform better in pretty much any cardiovascular measurement. Tirzepatide seems to be outperforming semaglutide. Also, I should mention these drugs, you have to inject them every single week. This is pretty inconvenient. Metsera, the company that was just bought, as we said, by Pfizer, they are developing a drug which would only be a once a month injectable. Again, this is not to market yet, so who knows what's going to happen. All sorts of stuff happens in phase 3 trials for drugs. But my point is, there's reason to be a bit skeptical about the future dominance of Novo Nordisk's drugs here. Now, the thing that I think many investors are excited about with Novo Nordisk is their oral GLP-1, effectively oral Ozempic, which is very likely to be approved by the FDA within a month, I think. So Novo Nordisk is going to be the first to market here. They are going to have a first mover advantage. Eli Lilly is not far behind. Their oral version of tirzepatide is expected to come to market in the first half of 2026. This is almost certainly going to expand the total addressable market for both of these companies. There's a lot of people who don't want to get Ozempic because they don't like needles or, the idea of injecting themselves once a week, that's just a non-starter. So while this likely will be a big drug and while they are first to market, I'm still not sure that they're going to beat out Eli Lilly on this one. There are certain advantages that tirzepatide, Eli Lilly's drug, is going to have over Novo Nordisk. Again, Novo Nordisk semaglutide, it's a larger molecule. It's actually hard to absorb and digest. You need to take the pill on an empty stomach. I don't think you can have food within either an hour or 30 minutes of having it. So there are some restrictions that are likely not going to be there for Eli Lilly's drug. I think it's possible we could see a similar situation to the chart we have here, where yes, Novo Nordisk, they made it to market first. They're going to be the first on the board here, while Eli Lilly is a zero. But that doesn't mean that Eli Lilly isn't going to eventually take market share here, which is what I imagine will happen. In addition, of course, as I said, there's other companies, there's other players who are going to be competing in this space. Metsera's oral GLP-1, they're going to be something to compete with in the near future. You also have Amgen, as I said. So, these aren't the only two fish in the pond. While I think revenue for Novo Nordisk, it's going to go up. That is my base case. I don't think you're going to see anywhere close to the explosive growth we've seen in the past 5 years going forward. Many investors look at Novo Nordisk and they say, it's trading for 13-ish times earnings or 13-ish times operating income or whatever it is, maybe 11 to 13, 11 to 14, depending on what metric you're using, whether you're looking at trailing or maybe forward numbers. You might have a little bit of a different number, but essentially people look at this and they say, that sounds very cheap, especially when you consider they've been trading up in the high 20s and the 30s in the past. Eli Lilly, this number is more like, 40. So it sounds very cheap. I would caution investors who are putting too much weight on a comparison to historical multiples. It's possible that, maybe these companies were just overvalued and maybe Novo Nordisk is just coming down more to a fair value. We look at a lot of companies on this channel actually that are trading for single digit multiples, much cheaper than Novo Nordisk. Now, most of them aren't as large and scaled out of a company as Novo Nordisk, and I'm certainly not saying that Novo Nordisk is overvalued. I'm just saying, just because it's trading for a 13 times multiple or something like that, that doesn't necessarily make a company cheap. And in particular, a reason why pharma companies generally don't trade for extremely high multiples is they have patents on these drugs for a certain amount of time, but then after that, companies are going to come in and create biosimilars, create generic versions of drugs that are extremely profitable. We see for Novo, their patents on their big moneymakers are going out to the early 2030s. So, you can think of this as roughly 6-7 years from now. Their patents are expiring. And this is a drug that, again, is accounting for roughly, 3/4-ish of the top line of this company. Now, when their patent runs out, doesn't mean that all their earnings are going to go up in smoke, but certainly the earnings and the margins on drugs that are not protected by patents, it's going to be less. Your margins will come under pressure there. Now, looking at their guidance for the full year, they've cut this a number of times. Now they're saying, 8 to 11% at constant exchange rates. The reported number is going to be lower, but typically I try to focus on constant exchange rates. A lot of the reason why the reported number is going to be down is simply because the dollar has weakened this year against other currencies like, the Danish krone that they're reporting in. Operating income only going to be mid-single digits here. And to clarify, these are their expectations for the full fiscal year. Again, when you look at the full fiscal year, the numbers for, Wegovy are up year on year quite a bit. The numbers for Ozempic are up year on year. But if you look at what's happening quarter over quarter, just where the business is trending now, it doesn't really look like it's growing, or at least growth looks very slow. So I think a lot of the drivers for the future of this business are going to be on their oral GLP-1 and just how that ends up performing in the market. I know tons of value investors look at this stock and they love it. A lot of people hold this as high concentrations in their portfolio. But to be honest, I see a lot of reasons why Novo's seemingly cheap valuation could be justified. I mean, growth, when you just look at quarter over quarter, it seems low. They're no longer the market leader. There is increased competition on the horizon. Prices are probably going to drop in the US. There's just natural increased risk when you have 75-ish% of your revenue coming from one drug, which has its patent coming up in, 6 to 7 years. So in any case, I think it's time to put numbers into our spreadsheet and see what we could expect for a return on our investment in NOVO Nordisk stock. And these are the numbers that I put in last time we looked at Novo. So this is from 3 months ago. And my base case, we see I had it growing 5% on the top line every year for 5 years. They definitely could outperform this, but given where the company is tracking right now, I don't feel comfortable increasing this number. Operating margins, I'm putting them at 44%. Operating margins have been trending up over time for this company. However, right now, trailing 12 months, they're down. They're under pressure from competition. I think this number might actually be a little bit optimistic. I feel like for my base case, I probably should lower it. I'm just going to drop it to 43. I'm going to keep free cash flow margin where it is, and I'm giving this company a 12 times multiple. I don't think higher than that is really justified for my base case. In fact, this is already assuming a little bit of multiple expansion. This is a multiple on operating income, and right now they're trading at roughly an 11 times multiple. So in any case, if the assumptions in this scenario come true, you're looking at a 12% annualized return every year for 5 years on this stock. That's not bad. This likely would be a market-beating return, and certainly they could outperform these numbers. You can imagine that if their oral GLP-1 is a success, I'm assuming in my bull case, revenue growing 12% every year for 5 years. Yes, that is very bullish, but this would be the scenario where oral GLP-1s unlock a larger addressable market, and NOVO Nordisk, they're the first mover here, and they're going to take a decent amount of that share. Operating margins I have at 45%. Maybe we'll just bring that down to 44, and I gave them an 18 times multiple. I think that's a bit optimistic, but it's my bull case. They've traded that expensive many times in the past, and you can certainly argue that with such a large market as obesity here, that they deserve a high multiple, especially if they're capturing a lot of the growth, which is what we're assuming in this scenario. And if this comes true, you're looking at a 29% annualized return every year for 5 years on NOVO Nordisk stock. This would mean more than a triple on your money over 5 years investing in NOVO Nordisk today. That's a fantastic investment return. And then we come to my bear case, which I'm assuming no growth on the top line for 5 years. And I know that that's probably going to sound ridiculous to a lot of investors in NOVO Nordisk. But first of all, they look rather stagnant right now, just quarter over quarter. And also on top of that, you have to realize how much of this growth here has really been from pricing in the US being so much higher. That's quite a risk. If pricing in the US drops significantly, we have to think about what that means for our top line here. I probably should bring operating margin down as well. I'm keeping it at 42%, which is similar to where it's at in trailing 12 months. But if prices drop, I imagine margins will compress. I'm just going to bring that down to 40 here. And I'm giving them a 10 times multiple in this scenario, which is really not that pessimistic for a company with no growth that also in 5 years, they would have their main patents coming due in just a few years' time. With that in mind, some people could argue that a 10 times multiple is actually not pessimistic enough. And if this case comes true, you're looking at no return on your money over 5 years. You'd be flat on your money even after being invested in this for 5 years. So overall, risk reward here, I think it looks decent. I don't think Novo Nordisk is a bad investment. Certainly this bull case could come true. Even in my base case, you're looking at quite a respectable return here. I don't think my projections of a return in Novo Nordisk stock, I don't think they're high enough for me to be interested at these prices. Now, that's probably not surprising if you saw my video 3 months ago because the price was similar and I essentially came to a similar conclusion. I don't hate this stock. I don't think Novo Nordisk is a bad company. In fact, I actually think it's decent value. It's not cheap enough for me. As far as where I'd probably be interested, under $40 a share, 35-ish, that's probably the point where I'd be excited. And if it never reaches a price where I feel that the risk reward is excellent, where I feel the risk reward is extremely good, then I'm okay never owning Novo Nordisk. If Novo Nordisk ends up doubling from here, tripling from here, it turns out that my bull case was actually correct and Novo Nordisk is an excellent investment today, that's fine. As I've said before, there's always going to be hundreds of stocks that go up in value that you did not buy. That's okay. Bottom line is I don't think the risk reward is good enough for me at today's prices. So Novo Nordisk, I still like it. I still think it's okay value, but it's going to be a pass. Who knows? It might go under $40 a share. It might go to 35 and I might have an opportunity to buy in. In fact, actually just earlier this week, the stock was at 43 when they announced that, hey, our semaglutide, not so good, not so effective for Alzheimer's. And the stock sold off 10% on that. I didn't think it was going to be effective for treating Alzheimer's. But the point is anything can happen in the stock market. If you think Novo is so cheap already, there's no way it goes under $40 a share. Let me tell you, it's always possible for something to happen in the stock market. So in any case, that's my opinion on Novo Nordisk. I think it's okay. I think it's decent value. I think the risk reward is fine, but it's not excellent. And that's what I'm looking for. So it's a pass for me. If you got value out of the video, subscribe to the channel. If you want to make spreadsheets like this or just support what I do, consider following me on Patreon. Link to that will be down below. And I hope to see you all in another video.